All right, welcome to day 23 of the program. Here we go, day 3, week 5. This week, we're focused on building our frameworks. Remember, a framework is your strategy, but it's converting your strategy into something that someone else can implement and that you can then derive the outcomes from that either directly or indirectly. The first day we focused on definition of the framework, just covered that again, quick recap there. And then also different approaches to building a framework. So as you're executing your strategy or before you execute your strategy, are you detailing the steps? Are you creating the road as you blaze the trail with the idea of how what you're doing could be applicable to other parts of the business that you're in, or more broadly to the business in terms of scope. So today we're going to talk about taking a strategy that you have and converting it into a framework and the things to look for in order to make that happen. So it's a strategy in your head could be great for you, but it isn't necessarily great for other people who might be able to take it and replicate it and implement it, and doesn't enable you to convert it into a framework that others can leverage to do that. So we need to move out of our heads into a practical application of your strategy by other people. So how do we do that? We need to identify the parts of the strategy that are repeatable and which are the edge cases. So if you look at the execution of your strategy and the steps that you took, which of those steps were things that would generally happen during an iteration of the strategy or a use case in which your strategy was applied, or which were the edge cases? So if you're working with clients, which things with the clients were repeatable in the strategy, were indicative across clients, was something that you would see generally happen with clients, and which were edge cases that maybe you wouldn't need to focus on all the time, and maybe took a disproportionate time away from doing other parts of the strategy and would come at an opportunity cost. So you want to identify what parts could reliably accelerate value. So when certain parts of your strategy have been executed, what kind of results did they create, and did those executions reliably create the outcome that you were seeking? So let's say I focus a lot on client services. If a certain type of consultation gave me the information I needed from a client in order to define and ultimately design a solution for them, if the prior step before consistently enabled me to do that, then that was a reliable use case of accelerating value in terms of defining the plan and the deliverables for the client. And then also it was repeatable. If I did that step in the strategy again and again and again, it would pretty much result in the expected outcome. And then also in terms of the steps that you took from the iteration of your strategy, and if you were taking an agile approach, what steps of the strategy that you executed ultimately were pre-handling objections. So let's say again, in client services, if a client would often say to me they didn't understand how a certain deliverable would be delivered, and they would constantly have questions about wanting to move forward because of not understanding like something like what the timeline would be or the requirements from them would be, or we're asking a lot from them up front, and we learned over time how we could ask less and less from the client and reduce the objections so that we can accelerate that value for them more upfront in the engagement. So what things did we do in order to pre-handle those objections? And in this case, what the ultimate result was to really reduce the number of steps that the client had to do in order to work with us, reduce the number of people on their side that they had to get involved, so that we could accelerate the result of the outcome. So again, on this, what parts of the strategy ultimately resulted in value and accelerated, made it happen, versus the parts that did not. Maybe you don't need those, or somebody else wouldn't need those parts if they were repeating your strategy. What executions of the strategy, when you did them, were generally reliable, meaning when you did them, the outcome would generally happen. And which parts of the strategy were really good at pre-handling those objections that clients had, so that they didn't appear later in the process and maybe turn the ultimate outcome. It just didn't happen. So whether you're working with clients or you're working with internal teams, looking for those opportunities to bring value forward, looking for those opportunities to handle objections earlier on in the execution of the strategy. Those are things that you really should include as part of your framework, that you're going to want others to repeat, because they're going to see success in their executions of your strategy, possibly even faster than you did, because you've already had the benefit of doing all these iterations and refining the process and then bringing the strategy to other people. So eliminate the wasteful parts. So I talked about the objections. If there were actual things in your strategy that you thought were helpful, but ultimately caused an objection, like let's say you mentioned something that you found yourself constantly explaining, or a step in the process that you were constantly explaining, and it didn't accelerate any kind of value, that's something that you're likely going to want to take out of the process, whether you plan on scaling your strategy to somewhere else as a framework, or if you keep on iterating your strategy, you're going to want to remove those things. Like, it's just not adding any value, and it's actually prohibitive. It's causing a problem in the implementation of the strategy. And then eliminating like communication that, you know, when you first read it or you first said it, or that comm that you sent out for a particular step, it just sounded so good to you when you put it together, but then you realize it just didn't serve any practical purpose and it didn't advance the strategy. It just kind of inflated your ego. I've been guilty of doing that. Eliminate those types of things. Bring simplicity into the process. You probably iterated this and saw it like complexity. Well, how did you make it simple? Bring that simplicity, reduce those things that bring in the complexity, and bring in the simplicities for other implementers that you want to execute your strategy. And then also unnecessary cycles, like fluff, jargon, vanity, and comms creates unnecessary cycles in people's heads, but also things that you find that when you executed, or people on your team executed, really didn't generate results. Eliminate those things. Don't make them a part of the framework. The goal of the framework is not to put in a ton of stuff and just have everybody execute it and not get a result. It's just like this program, it's focusing on the key things that increase the probability of success. You're essentially exporting out a habit that you built for a particular situation that's relevant to other situations. Refine the habit so that it gets the desired result as quickly as possible, and with the highest degree of probability that every time it's repeated, it drives success. So you want to constantly think about that. Again, you see this pattern of habit and reliability, success, and value. So the action item for today: look at prior work or a prior strategy, quickly convert it into the components for a framework. Remember, find the things that are repeatable, find the things that accelerate value, find the things that pre-handle objections, remove the things in the process that create objections, remove the things that create wasteful cycles, like things like jargon and vanity comms. Just remove all of that. And I would just say a final note on this. Sometimes we focus on all the benefits that we can put into some things, thinking that we're bringing the value as quickly as possible, or convincing the person, the client, the stakeholder, the career gatekeeper, whatever it is, faster in terms of making a decision. Like, there's just so much great stuff. But in reality, if something is really truly that good and your strategy is that good and it's creating results, it's really more of a process of removing the reasons for saying no. So just as you think about all the great things to put in, think about all the great things to take out, because maybe they're not like great things in terms of their delivery. Maybe they were conceptualized as great things, but think about all those things to take out, because the success of the repeatability of the habit, of the pattern, of your strategy, of your framework is dependent upon the value from the steps that you do and the steps that you also remove. And you invested the time to execute these strategies. Now just hone them and export them out and really just trim them so that they function well. All right, so we focused today on understanding what parts of our strategy help us in terms of creating a framework. And I will see you tomorrow when we focus on the next topic. Make sure to do this exercise. Make sure to do all your exercises. This is how we start habits, and this is how we get habits to stick. And this is what ultimately transforms your leadership practice. And if you want to be a transformational executive, you got to get these habits in place. All right. I'm glad I made that point again. Look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's conversation.